I'm really glad to have Connie Meckler with me. This is I've done now, this is my third interview, and it's just been fascinating listening to people's stories and then how they connect that to their faith. And Connie has an amazing story. We've just been talking about it here a few minutes ago, and man, that started a long time ago, didn't it, Connie?
It did. I have dealt with multiple cancer diagnoses. The first was in, I was 25 years old. It was in 1990. Dale was
now I can do the math, so
Yep.
I know how old you are
Yeah,
now.
I know. It's okay. I don't care. I'm not shy. I'm 55.
Okay.
And that's a good thing.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
But anyway, Dale was in vet school at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I had a mole on my elbow, and it was there. It wasn't huge. It wasn't anything really, but it looked a little funky. My mom had melanoma, and so had my dad. So it was in the family. So we had an awareness of melanoma. Had it removed. It actually came back. It was not anything.
Wow.
Yeah. But then 3 months later, it grew back. And at that time it got real dry and itchy, and it was like, Dale's like, you gotta get that taken off again. And in that short 3 months, it became melanoma, and it was called a Clark's level 4 at that time, which it pretty much was all the way down to the muscle.
Oh,
so
my
very
goodness.
deep.
Oh my goodness.
So they had to do a white excision, which is still standard procedure, and they felt they got it all. They had clean margins and everything, so there's no other treatment to do. We just continued to go forward with our life.
Yeah.
Finish vet school and find a job and
Yep.
move to Algona.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
All those
yeah.
good things. So
Yeah. Well, clearly your body was not cooperating.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because it's supposed to be all gone. You got the margins. You got
Right, right.
It's gone.
Right,
It's
exactly.
Yeah.
And, and life goes on, and literally 9.5 years go by, and I have no problems with anything.
Really.
And then one of the things they said, if it would ever to move on, it would move on into the lymph system, because that's the closest path. And from my elbow to the axilla area,
Sure.
that lymph node. I was showering. I do skin checks, body checks. I'm very good at self-care, and felt a big lump under my armpit, and went to the clinic out here and got it checked out, and ended up having it surgically removed. And at that time, excuse me, it was metastatic melanoma, stage 3, because it was in the lymph nodes, so away from the original site. Makes it automatically.
Yeah, and the lymphatic system, that's the transportation system that gets it all over your body.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my.
And I've learned a lot about the lymphatic system.
I'll bet you have.
I've learned a lot about a lot of this stuff that I really didn't want to know, but it's okay. It's all good. There's a purpose.
And you said that was 9 years after the first.
Got into the study. I went out in the first year. I didn't count. I should have counted, but I bet it was every 2 weeks for the first month, then it went to every 3 weeks, then 4 weeks, and then eventually it was every 2 months in that first year. Then it went to it stayed every 2 months for the year 2, and then it was every quarter.
My goodness.
From years 3 to 5. So.
Oh boy. So
We got a
5 years
little-
you were
5 years, sort of, because we got interrupted because I got another diagnosis of cancer in that mix. So.
Oh my.
Yeah. So. It seemed like February and October are bad months for me as we start.
October 1st, yeah, exactly.
But anyway, I was at my regular physical, and Dr. Manassi was doing my physical, and she was checking my lymph nodes, because even though I'd had most of these removed, I still had lymph nodes, obviously, in this area and elsewhere in the body. But anyway, she was, and all of a sudden she said, I feel something in this left side. And I'm like, what do you mean you feel something? She's like, there's a lump there. And so it was like, okay. She said, we need to check this out. It took forever, it seemed like, to get those results back. And that's because they were looking for melanoma or related type cancers, and they weren't finding it. But what they ended up finding was adenocarcinoma, which is breast cancer. So
Holy moly.
So I went through chemotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
Great support staff again, Dale, of course, but also some other really wonderful people.
Friends from here.
Friends from here,
Yeah.
Kirsten Klepper, Julie Herbstolmer, Teresa Keeker here in Algona.
You know-
the list goes on and on, but
Aren't the people of Algona amazing?
we are blessed.
And I'm just going to plug it. It's First Lutheran too. It's just
Absolutely it
it's an
is.
amazing congregation.
Yeah, yeah.
The way people surround each other, and
Yeah.
you know, you obviously you're close friends with
Yeah.
Kirsten and Julie.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter who it
No.
is. I mean,
it
it's
doesn't.
just what happens here.
Right.
Which
Yes.
is why I'm here. I mean, I felt that as soon as I walked in the door
Yeah,
the very
absolutely.
first time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And got that done and behind me, and then lo and behold, I was doing self-check and found
Wow.
a BB. It literally felt like a BB in my left breast, which was all a mastectomy. It was all, it's not my tissue, it's all implant. So it stuck out very easily, because it's between the implant and the skin.
Sure.
And so I could feel it.
Yeah.
And so I had to have it checked out, and it was recurrent breast cancer. It became clear that I had to do radiation this time.
Mm-hmm.
So we did another 12 weeks of chemo, Taxol this time, and then followed with 6 weeks of radiation. And so we got through that.
And what year is this, by the way?
Okay, that was 2006. So, yeah.
Okay.
So-
And we still have 14 years to catch up to today.
Yeah, pretty much. But it gets better. It does get
Okay,
better. So
good.
so we got through that, and really and truly, chemotherapy and radiation, it's not fun.
No.
But again, super awesome support staff. I mean, people from church, people from the community. I had food. I had flowers. Dale was like, "Are we a florist shop?" We might be. So then I have had 2 other melanomas since
Yeah.
then, both early stage 1,
Yeah.
then removed, done. Don't ever expect any problem because they were so early. Just throw in there that there's a slight increase of a risk of pancreatic cancer. And it's like, but they said, do you have anybody in your family who has pancreatic? No, nobody has pancreatic cancer. We're good. Except then in 2013, my mom started getting really sick and they couldn't figure it out. And she was not actually diagnosed until 2014, but she did have pancreatic cancer. And so then, of course, that has to be dealt with.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to, well, obviously this has an impact on me.
And your mom,
She ended up passing in 2016, June of 2016.
yeah.
So, but she fought a great fight.
Pancreatic cancer is just...
It's bad. If you don't catch it early,
It's...
you're not going to
You're not-
survive.
you're not gonna
There's
survive.
nothing
That's right.
yet
Yeah.
there are some positive things happening, but again,
Yeah.
it's not going to work for everybody. And
So really, because you know about this, that this is something that's potentially something you're going to carry with you.
Right.
You have the best chance of surviving it because you're going to get it caught right away.
Early.
Yeah.
That's
A couple things occurred to me, and something we didn't talk about ahead of time, but sort of came up in this conversation.
Yeah.
Your support staff.
Uh-huh.
Is what you call them, but basically what you're talking about is you're talking about all the people that surround you. And the thing that I've noticed about you and Dale is how attentive you are to people who are facing problems.
yes, we try.
Oh, you don't try, you do it.
Well,
I watch
thank
it.
you.
I watch it on many levels, and it's just amazing what you guys do.
Yeah. Nobody is alone, and nobody should ever feel that way. And we all have trials and tribulations. I mean, we've been told that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not promised an easy path.
Yeah.
So if we can support someone else in a time that is dark for them, we're going to reach out and try to do that.
You said something that just really caught me. You said you're never alone.
No.
And in our world today, people feel alone. I mean, you've heard me talk about the internet and the
Yes.
telephones, and
Yes.
we've never been more connected. We've never been more alone.
Correct.
But here we are in this small town with a bunch of caring people, and in this really this it's a medium-sized congregation, but it's a family congregation.
Yes.
And they've all been touched by the love of Jesus. They never feel alone with that.
Absolutely.
And then you guys turn around and you love others the same way you've been loved. I think it's, folks, I don't know where you live, I don't know what you do, get connected someplace, because you're never alone.
Correct.
I thank you for sharing that. That was
Yes,
one.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I have one more question.
Yeah.
Tell me about how all of this worked with your faith journey.
Yeah, so this is where I'll probably lose it.
It's okay.
When you have all these things seemingly rolling over you, and it just seemed like that for a while there, it just seemed like rapid fire. It's like we just get through this hurdle and then we'd be faced with this. And we were active members of First Lutheran Church at the time of all of these diagnoses, except for the very first melanoma because we were still in school
Sure.
trainings. But you can't help but feeling like you are alone and that you almost have done something wrong.
Oh, like God's punishing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I quickly worked through that
Sure.
with the help of this wonderful congregation
Yeah.
and the pastors that have gone through this congregation. But I spent a lot of time reading, listening to music, just kind of getting inside of myself and finding what is that connection, how do I know that I'm not alone? Well, there's a million things that happened, but one of the things that happened along this journey is one of my flights back from Indianapolis. I was reading in the Bible, I was reading in Genesis actually, and studying and just thinking and reflecting and looking out the window, small plane, right next to the window, and it was evening, and the sun was setting, and Pastor Dave had a sermon the other day about a sunrise and the colors and the beauty, and I had that same vision out my window with the sunset, and rather than looking at it as the sun's going down and life is ending, for me, it was that same feeling. It was like God has created all of this beauty and the colors of the rainbow were out there for me to witness. And I'm reading Genesis and reading about a rainbow, and the whole thing just kind of came flooding in that, oh, I'm not alone at all.
Yeah.
I just need to open my eyes and build that faith.
Yeah.
Trust
Yeah.
in the path that he's leading me on.
Wow, Connie.
Because even though it's difficult and has been difficult, it's my path. And it's the path that he created for me. So
Yeah. Thank you. That took a lot of courage, Connie. Thank you so much. And it's, my goodness, I just counted them as you were talking 6 times. You've lost count. Yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah. My goodness. So this sermon series is called Walking the Walk, and I'll be doing this for the next 5 weeks. This started as a conversation in our vision group. We've got this vision study group that, by the way, we'll be talking about here very soon in terms of the next 10 years for First Lutheran. But we were talking about sermons, and one of the women in the group, who I love because she's always so honest with me, she said, Pastor Dave, I like your sermons, and I like Shelley's sermons, but you got to talk to us and get us up there because we've got some stories. And she's absolutely right. So I throughout the summer, I've been sort of putting this all together, and we're going to have 5 weeks of this, 5 different people. Dawn and Keith are going to be next week. And three of the people are going to be or the couples are going to be from here in First Lutheran, and I have two guys from my former church, and just some incredible stories. So Connie's story, cancer from the time she was 25 years old and for the next many years after that, and still deals with it today. As I listened to that again and the interview that took place, the one thing that just kept coming back to me over and over again was the way Connie would say, "You are never alone." And she experienced that with God, and she experienced that with you folks, with others as well. You are never alone. And I found that interesting because that is Connie's experience, but that's not most of the world's experience. In fact, down through the ages, when something goes wrong with someone, when there is trouble, they tend to find themselves very much alone. I mean, check your Bibles. It is story after story after story, more stories than I can count, when some Bible character or someone in the Bible gets into some kind of trouble and they find themselves isolated and lost. And it happens over and over again. So the story that Shelley just read from Mark chapter 5 is a perfect example of that. She's 12 years with an illness. She is 12 years with doctors who, because they don't know what they're doing, creates more pain and suffering than they do healing. In fact, they create no healing whatsoever. And she is 12 years in isolation and with loss, this woman that meets Jesus on that day. The isolation comes from this. It comes from the church. Okay, got that? Connie's experience is that the church is a place where people gathered around her. This woman's experience was that the church was a place where she was not welcome. Because of the particular trouble she had, this flow of blood, she was considered to be unclean and not acceptable to God. So she couldn't go into the church, and she had to keep her distance from everyone. She had to maintain a barrier all around herself all the time. For 12 years, she was isolated. She was lost. She was alone. It was almost like there was this invisible fence all around her. And she was on one side of the fence, and everyone else, including God, all the clean people, and God, who is himself the most clean of all, on the other side. And there the two shall meet. And that's where we pick up today's story. Because this woman does something that is completely unacceptable, especially in that day and time. She reaches across the fence and touches Jesus. And she's not supposed to do that. But you know, at this point, she doesn't care, and she's heard about him. She's heard the stories, and she is just ready for something, for anything. She doesn't know what's going to happen. She's not sure, but she takes a risk. She reaches across, and she touches him. And the second she does that, that thing, that trouble that she has been the thing that has isolated her and left her lost and alone, excuse me, and has made her unclean so that no one can be around her. That thing became something very, very different. It became not a fence, but a gate and a doorway to a place of healing and wholeness and acceptance. That's God's way. That's how he works. My friends, and let me be very clear about this, because something Connie mentioned, she said at one time she felt like, man, this is punishment. God doesn't punish that way. God doesn't put this stuff on us. The trials and troubles that you face, please listen to this, folks, it's so important. The trials and troubles that you face are not born of God. God didn't say, I'm going to test you or I'm going to punish you. This stuff just happens because we live in a world of sin, and we live in a world of trouble, and we live in a world of evil. But that's not God's doing. Instead, what God does is he takes those things that are in this world that are set against you, the troubles that you have, And he turns those troubles on their head, because those are the things that have been isolating you. Those are the things that keep you set apart. And he takes them and he turns them upside down and inside out, so that those are the places where he comes to you and he meets you. Because story after story after story in the Bible starts with people just like this woman who had this issue of blood for 12 years. And story after story after story in our lives, Connie's life, is just that. The cancer wanted to isolate her. It was the enemy, the great persecutor. And either the person who's persecuted and the person who's lost reaches across and touches, or just as often, Jesus goes across the fence and touches. And he uses that to change everything. Including, folks, think about this, the best story of all in the Bible. Jesus hanging from the cross. And there are folks on that day that mock him and deride him and ridicule him. They spit on him. They beat him. And they say, you deserve this. And we will not come close to you. You got what was coming to you. And then there were others who saw this and say, oh my goodness, what an unlucky guy. He got caught in the meat grinder of the Roman Empire. Too bad. But then there were others. And they are the silent ones. And there are more of them than you might imagine, who see what happens to Jesus, and they have sympathy for him. Sympathy, this is an underrated word. Sim, prefix that means with. Pathos, a word that means suffer. They had sympathy for him because of what he was going through. In other words, they suffered with him. They were drawn to him. So that what he was experiencing, they were experiencing. They could feel it. They knew it. They were drawn to him. And what happened to him happened to them. You see what happens? God takes the trouble. The biggest trouble of all, death. And especially death on a cross. Because that is a cursed death. It's not only a horrible death, but it's a shameful death. He's been executed for a crime. Shameful death. And God takes that's supposed to separate Jesus, and put him on the other side of a fence. And he uses it to draw all of the world to him. And he uses it to draw all of the world together as one. Could we sing?
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Heir of salvation, purchase of God. Born of his Spirit, washed in his blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.
Thank you so much. So, there's something that I see happen all the time. And it troubles me. Because there is this thing that happens when someone gets in trouble. where they begin to become isolated from everyone else and everything else, just like the woman in the story. They're facing something, and the phone rings, and they decide that they're not going to answer it. Or there's a text message that comes through, and if they answer the text message at all, everything's fine. And they stop coming to church, and they stop meeting with their friends, start withdrawing, because it starts like this. It's just too painful to talk about. Just too personal. So they withdraw. And the result is isolation. It's the fence. It has a way of building itself. Thought about that as I thought about all the things that Connie said. What wisdom. Thank you. I'm embarrassing. I'm sorry, Connie. But how different the experience is here in the body of believers. Because I will tell you that every time food showed up on her door, and every time Dale got to put another bouquet of flowers someplace else in the house, and every time there was a card or a letter or an expression of concern, or we're praying for you, or whatever it might be, every time that happened, someone had sympathy. They were suffering with Connie and Dale. Because for Jesus, it was the persecution of evil people. For Connie, the persecution was called cancer. And God used that to draw Connie close to him. And God used that to draw us together around something that just wants to drive wedges. It is, as Paul writes in the second letter to the Corinthians, that is the grace that is sufficient for you. That is God's power made perfect in weakness. And so Paul goes on to say we embrace that weakness. Because where I am weak, God turns the world upside down. So, my friends, I don't know what it is you're facing. You are never alone. Ever alone. He is there in that thing that looks like a giant to you. And he changes it, and he transforms it, and he turns it on its head. So that becomes the place of sufficient grace, the place of power made perfect. And for that we give him thanks and praise.